We are being recorded, so if you do not wish to appear on the video, please mute yourself and turn off your cameras now. Thank you.
All righty.
Bigger finger there, Jocko.
Well, welcome everybody to our little group, the NYC Complexity in Kinevin Meetup. I am Jocko, and that right over there is Barbara. We're kind of devoted to the discussion of complexity in human systems, and that word anthro-complexity again. And we're assuming that because you're here, you're probably interested in it as well. So we're also somewhat interested in computational complexity, which can be thought of sort of as the Santa Fe Institute math kind of complexity. But that's sort of a whole different shindig. But we are looking for people at any time. If anybody knows anybody over at the Santa Fe Institute, please let them know, and we'll be glad to give them a spot. And if anybody here is knowledgeable or interested in that, we're always looking for people to come and speak with us. And then the other note about the name, the Kinevin part is part of our name, but we like to mix it up. We're primarily a complexity meetup, all things complexity science, complex adaptive systems, stuff like that. But a lot of people are exposed to it through Kinevin. So that's sort of why we put it in there. And our little joke is that it's a nice marketing ploy. Don't tell Dave. Anyways, that's me, and I'm going to turn over to Barbara, who is our lovely co-host, and she's the smart one, by the way. So I'll let her speak now. Take it away.
All right. Oops, 1 second.
I take it back.
All right, keep quiet.
I'll mute now. I'll go ahead and mute now.
Yeah. So welcome. And, I already gave you the spiel about the camera and the microphone if you do not wish to appear on the recording. We are delighted to welcome Bruce Waltuck to the meetup tonight. Bruce has been a scholar and practitioner of methods and insights from the fields of complex adaptive human systems for over 20 years. He is a board member of the Plexus Institute, and if you don't know what that is, you should probably find out, and holds a unique master's degree that is in complexity, chaos, and creativity. He is currently a professor at Keene University School of Management and Marketing, and has presented throughout the United States, Canada, Brazil, and Southeast Asia to more than 25,000 people. He was a participant in the 2019 World Symposium on Human Complexity and is a core member of the participatory narrative inquiry community. He is president of his consultancy, Free Think for Change. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Barbara. And again, my welcome and thanks both to you and Jocko for inviting me to do this, and to this great and literally global audience that we have with us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, but keep the chat open. I'll be doing, some of you may be familiar with what's called the chat waterfall. We'll be doing that in just a moment as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share a screen here, get that up and running for you. There we go. And let's see if we can either put it into the display mode, or I can maybe make this a little bigger. Of course, my computer is choosing now to not, there we go, to not cooperate too well. Is that sufficient for everyone to see okay? Everybody okay with that, with the visuals?
I am. Looks good.
Okay, very good. Let me just move one little thing on my screen, and we'll talk about this here. So tonight, what I want to talk about, and you'll see this topic, again, by way of context, some of you, I presume many or most, if not all, have some familiarity with these concepts of what are called complex adaptive or complex adaptive human systems, to distinguish them from systems in nature. And tonight, I'm going to be talking with you about what I had discussed with Barbara and Jocko about some really fundamental concepts that lead us into thinking and acting into our most complex and different kinds of experiences and situations. And so as you see, the title here tonight, we want to talk about the problem with problems, and we'll talk about that. And there are different things that we experience that we know about, things we don't know about, but maybe we can. And there are things that are just downright unknowable to us or pretty much to anybody else. And the objective, as you see in my heading here, is we want to achieve better outcomes, and most of the time we need to do that in coordination with others. And so that really is what I want to speak with you about tonight in these minutes that we're going to go ahead here. And I like to begin, and we can do this as a chat waterfall. If you're not familiar with a chat waterfall, I'm going to give you this framing question that you see here and ask you to type your answers into the chat, but don't hit enter until I give you the word to go ahead and enter. And then they will all kind of cascade out into the chat at once. And so this is what I call the two questions. And it's something that I use in my teaching, and I use it in seminars as well. And there's no right or wrong answer. This isn't a textbook kind of a thing. And your answers are likely to be somewhat different than mine. But my questions to you, or my question to you, is what are the two questions that every one of us, every human being, is trying to answer every moment that we're alive? So take a moment and think about that. And once you do, again, type your responses into the chat, but don't hit enter. We'll give you a moment to consider that and for everybody to get that typed in. So go ahead and do that. And I will tell Barbara and Jocko, I cannot see the chat window right now the way I've got my screen visualizing. I can see some videos and I can see my slides, but I can't see the chat, at least at the moment. So I won't see what everybody is saying, but I'll ask Barbara to unmute once we tell everybody to do that. And Barbara, if you'd be so kind as to, once we get it going, to unmute and just kind of read them aloud as they're cascading out into the chat. So hopefully by now you've had a moment or so to enter your responses to the questions. And I'm going to tell you to go ahead, please, at this point and hit enter. Actually, it looks like I can bring the chat up. Maybe I can.
I think you should.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I can. I got it. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yay for the tech, and yay for the flashing orange light on my dashboard that said I could do that. So why am I here? What's next? What'll happen tomorrow? Very common responses that I see all the time when I ask these questions of folks. And again, no right and wrong, and your answers are certainly likely to be different. What is our purpose? What's in it for me? How long will this event continue? Well, until I say it's done or until you leave, I suppose. I don't know. I don't know. How might one live? How to make sense of things? Why is my pee that color? Well, what did you have for lunch today? I don't know. I can't answer that. Or what have you been drinking during happy hour, perhaps? I'm not sure about that either. So what is my purpose? Where are my glasses? What's in my immediate environment? Relevant and immediate threats, from Andrew. Some really interesting ones. Again, a lot of these are pretty common. Some of you, as you can imagine, are ones that maybe we don't see quite as often in that way. And so I appreciate everybody's responses on that. So my answers to this, again, perhaps a little different than yours, but my answers, which are the answers that lead to what I want to share with you in the remaining minutes we're going to be together. My answers are that every moment we're alive, we're trying to answer, well, what does this mean and what will I or we do about it? And this is the nature of our human experience. We're trying to sort these things out. And we don't always consciously focus on or perhaps struggle with making sense of things in that way. But this is the nature of, I believe, what it is that we're doing all the time in this way. And so, and again, many of you will know this image, classic famous image from the film 2001. And our lived experience, again, moment to moment, what makes us who and what we are right now, everything and every moment that we've experienced and that we've been alive tends to form the norms, what we believe is the way that things ought to be, our values. This is right, this is wrong, this is how I will act or we should act, our beliefs, our intentions, the cultures of our families, our communities, the places in which we work and live and interact with others. And so all of this then leads us to our expectations. This is how we think the world ought to be or how we would like it to be. And our preferences about this is really, I would like it this way and not that way, whether it's in our work, whether it's in our family, whether it's in politics or social communities or any other aspect of what we live. These are the things that determine and shape, again, our expectations, preferences, the things we believe we need and want, and in this fashion. Well, at the same time, we don't always see the world and situations in the same way. And we see in this particular illustration, kind of a classic cartoon, that in this case, each person observing what it is that they're experiencing not only believes that they're right, but we can certainly make the argument that they are correct. And so how can this be? How can this be? And what is there about the situation that leads different people to different explanations of what's going on? And I forget in the moment who the person was to whom this next quote is attributed, but a quote that I really like is that one definition of the complexity of a situation is the number of coherent narratives that can be told about it. And so in this case, certainly the narratives, the explanations of the two observers seem to both be coherent. Now, there may be other situations in which we might argue and say, well, what you're saying this is and what you're saying it means doesn't hold together, isn't logical, isn't coherent. And yet there are many situations that we experience in which there are indeed multiple coherent narratives. If we ask people about some of the most challenging situations that we know about, there will be all these different points of view, and they will seem to be, or perhaps can be argued to be, coherent and hang together logically and rationally in that way. Well, again, the title of what I wanted to share with you tonight is The Problem with Problems. And as we begin to think about the kinds of problems and situations that we experience and that we need to address or solve or act into, they're not all the same. And again, for those who are familiar with the Cynefin, C-Y-N-E-F-I-N, Welsh word pronounced Cynefin, for those who are new to this, you've heard Barbara and Jocko and I talk about this already this evening. You'll see some of this reflecting the different domains or aspects of the Cynefin framework. And so we know that not all the problems that we that we experience are the equivalent. Some things that we experience, we know that they're pretty clear, they're pretty obvious. Everyone, if we all look at something, and I often use the example of a flat tire, maybe you've changed one, maybe you've had one, maybe you never have, but pretty much if we all look at it, we know what it is and what needs to be done to repair it so that we can be on our way, whether we do it ourselves or call AAA or call a family member or friend or whatever we do. And then there's other kinds of things that we experience that are, well, they're just more technical, they're more complicated. I don't know about any of you. I use the example often of giving someone a root canal on their tooth or even a heart bypass. I can't do that for you, and you probably can't do that for me. And yet at the same time, you and I probably know that we can call on the experts. We can find people who are expert dental surgeons or heart surgeons who can do what needs to be done to give us as much detailed information as is necessary to give us what is in fact a highly predictably reliable approach to solving and resolving that problem. We can get the heart bypass. Maybe every surgeon we talk to will have a slightly different take on what's exactly going on and what exactly needs to be done. But we know that these are all reliable people with proven expertise who can then give us a solution that we know in advance, and this is important. We talk to them, they say, this is what you've got going on, this is what I will do, and it will work. And we know this logically and predictably, prospectively in advance before we take action. Now, the next kind of situation that we encounter are things that are of a different nature entirely. There's problems, homelessness, opioid addiction crisis, domestic violence issues, peace in the Middle East, pick any one that you like. And there is no expert who can tell you, do this and it will resolve that. They cannot. It is not just not known, it's not knowable, no matter what and who you talk to. It's not like the heart bypass where none of us in this room may know exactly how to treat it, but we know that we can call the expert who will help us. And so when we deal with these other kinds of situations, we need to begin to think about and better understand the distinction here, and what then can and should we do, what must we do to get those optimal outcomes, to get to the best result when we're dealing with that kind of a situation. And then finally, there are situations that we encounter, and again, this is the New York City group. I use the example often about the people trapped inside in the Twin Towers in 9/11. And the things that they thought they knew about what to do if a building was burning or there was some emergency turned out not to be applicable in that particular situation. In some cases, what they thought they were doing that would be helpful turned out to be counterproductive and even dangerous, and increasing their risk. And some of these situations, we refer to them as chaotic. There's not really much that anybody knows about what it is that's going on. We can't quite figure out, well, this is happening because of that, or this is making that happen. And so what then are and will we do? What are the options? So we'll take a little bit of a look. Again, these are sort of the foundation and fundamental concepts here about these problems with the problems that we experience. Again, the simple and obvious ones, these are things where we know what we know, and everybody knows the solution, as I said, like the flat tire. And one small footnote that I like to put in about even these clear and obvious things that basically we know about is that depending on the context, we may have an emotional response on top of our knowledge and our understanding of the facts and of the causality and of the solutions. And that can impede our ability to act in, again, the optimal way to get to the outcome that we really need and deal with that. And so what distinguishes this and these other kinds of situations and problems is, among other things, well, how much do we really know what it is, as we'll see, and the extent to which people who observe the situation can agree, well, it's this, not that, or it's this, and then it becomes that, and so on. Or we just don't know. Again, these multiple coherent narratives, or the degrees of difference between the ways that any one of us may observe and reach a conclusion about what it is that we're experiencing and what needs to be done in response. Those two questions, what does it mean, or what is it rather, and what are we going to do about it? So the next type of situation that we encounter, as I've talked about, sort of like the root canals and the heart bypasses of life. And here, again, this is actually an illustration. It's the cover of a book about making bread. And these are different ways of braiding the dough. That's not rope. These are actually bread techniques to make these fancy loaves. And if you know how to do it, you can make them. So that knowledge and expert practice becomes the way forward. So we may know what we do not know. We may know the unknowns. I don't know how to make that. Actually, I do, having grown up with a father and two grandfathers who were bakers. And again, as we've talked about, the experts can give us that range of viable options and a reasonable certainty that we will reach the outcome that we intend. It's one of those things where, again, everything's easy if you know how, but most of us may not. And in the business world and in community change and the other kinds of challenges that presumably many or all of us who are here tonight deal with, these kinds of situations come up a lot. And there are certain ways, as we'll see, in terms of the problem with problems. One of the things, as we'll talk about, is the kind of mental pitfall of treating one kind of problem as if it's something else and the dangerous consequences of that. So again, not so much here in terms of conflicts of power or emotion, how people feel about the situation. We tend to be able to reach consensus without too much difficulty. You know, we may have to sit around and say, well, we've got this problem down in the factory floor, and we need to fix this situation and improve that process because we're not getting the quality and the quality control of that thing. And what are we going to do about it? And the handful of experts may give you some options, and you've got to, again, now negotiate meaning and coordinate action. What does it mean? What am I going or we going to do about it? And it shouldn't be that hard, and you still have a high probability of success. But then we get to something else again. And again, those of you of a certain age may know the illustration here. This is from the 60s. This is a comic character by the artist and illustrator R. Crumb, and his name is Mr. Natural. And kind of like this particular illustration of Mr. Natural here, questing into the unknown. Well, when we're dealing with, as I said before, these most complex, most difficult, and some of you may be familiar with the professor from Harvard, leadership professor Ron Heifetz. Had the pleasure of meeting him in Manhattan one time. And Ron talks about the distinction. He refers to basically two principal domains of situations that we encounter, which he refers to as basically technical and adaptive. And I particularly like Ron Heifetz's use of adaptive capacity, something I learned primarily from him, or first from him, before I even really knew about the Cynefin stuff. And when we're dealing with these most difficult, most challenging situations, again, we're dealing with stuff that the experts don't know. Nobody knows what it is. And so what do we do? And again, those of you familiar with the work of Cynthia Kurtz and David Snowden in particular, they were collaborators early on in what became the Cynefin framework. And Dave talks about what you see in the third point here, that what we need to do, really all we can do, is explore multiple promising options. Dave talks about doing this in parallel simultaneously in ways that are, and this is the important piece, safe to fail. It's okay if we think maybe this will work out, but it doesn't. And you're not all going to get fired, and you're not all going to lose your bonuses, and bad things will not happen just because what we tried didn't work out. This becomes really important, as we'll see, in distinguishing and dealing with some other kinds of things that managers and leaders and change agents tend to do a lot. We'll get to that in a minute or three. And so again, if we're going to change things, if we're going to act in ways that are not the way we've always been, we're not going to treat this the way we've always treated it, because we don't want to get what we're getting now, even though we aren't sure about the causal relationships between what we do and what happens, because there's just too many moving and interacting parts. And the people and the situation are simultaneously affecting and being affected by everybody else and everything else that's going on, which is causing this evolution of thought and action and patterning of behavior and outcomes. And so anything we do that's different than what we've done, even in many times the most subtle ways that we may not think is going to impact the situation, well, it will. And we're going to change from the status quo, and we will be changing and, in many cases, adapting. And Dave also talks about not just adaptation. You may be familiar with the other term he uses occasionally, exaptation. And for those of you who may be familiar with the literature of entrepreneurship, and we see this especially in community and social change and what's called asset-based community development work, people who don't have all kinds of help and resources. The term you'll hear is bricoleur or bricolage. People who take what they have where they are right now because other help isn't coming, and perhaps use it in ways in which it was not designed or intended. And that's really when Dave Snowden talks about exaptation. In a way, I believe that's really what that is about. What can we do with what we have and who we have right here, right now? Even if we have more resources, even if we have money and people and things, that may not lead us to the solution that we're looking for, to the outcome that we want. And again, what we want to do ultimately as we are trying multiple pathways is to keep what's working and stop what isn't working. And we need to be able to have a sense of this even as we're beginning to act into it, to know what it is we're looking for, and to have a sense of how to amplify that which is working and to put a stop to that which isn't. Sometimes that can be as much or more of a challenge for folks acting into these complex challenges as other aspects of it. So as I said at the beginning, in asking you about the so-called two questions, what does this mean and what will I or we do about it? Much of the time, the situations and the challenges that we face, we're not in it alone. We're in this with other people. We are all of us here tonight. And if I said to you, how are we going to teach complexity to the world, or whatever the case may be, the question might be, we would have to figure something out. And this tends to be through the process of dialogue. Comes from the ancient Greek. I know that there's at least one person here who can almost certainly tell us exactly what it means and what it comes from. I only make a feeble attempt at that, having taken only one philosophy course. And we are thinking together. And how will we decide? How are we going to engage in this dialogue? And how will we begin then to reach that conclusion about, well, we're still not certain about what it is. We're not certain about what to do. But maybe we've got some sense of this might work and that might work and the other might work. So let's give those all a try. And then we need to work on how we're going to do what we do. And the questions that you see in the third bullet point, that's just kind of a simple sequence that I like to follow and that I suggest to others that I work with. I know that there's a famous book called Start With Why. Well, to me, no offense to the author, to Simon, but rather I believe that there is no why without the previous what. The why is always about something. Why what? And so to me, we really need to begin with the what, notwithstanding that best-selling book. I haven't written any best-selling books lately, so I can't help you on that one. So what is it that we think is going on? Why does it matter? How are we going to do this thing? And who do we need and all of that? Just a simple sequence of ways, again, to try and begin to get some foundational understandings of how to lightly structure the process by which we're going to be in dialogue and try to move things forward. This next piece is something that I came up with when I was creating a unique collaborative effort at the United States Department of Labor between their principal employee union and their management and staff, parties that really had not collaborated in any major initiatives ever before. And this may or may not be useful to you in thinking about and working with others, but I found that just teaching people team dynamics and how to sort of sit and in dialogue with others to try and reach consensus and make sense of stuff, that these so-called 4 C's, these 4 words, were very helpful. I told people, communicate with each other. And by consulting, what I told them was, if you know something that you have any reason to believe may be of interest or value to the other parties that you're dealing with, don't sit back and hold the information or the knowledge. Bring it to them. Act prospectively. Consider that which others are saying. Again, there may be multiple coherent narratives. Is it a 6 or is it a 9? Well, maybe it's both. Or maybe it's something else altogether. And so consider the options and the thinking of others before there is that consensus or that decision about what to do, even acting into the most difficult challenges. And then what I was taught way back in 1990, where this came from, was about what we even mean by reaching a consensus about what to do. I was told one definition of consensus: I may not like it, but I will live with it and I will actively support or commit to what we all agree to do. And so these are just a few simple, you might want to call them, again, if you're, again, sort of a student of Dave Snowden, of Knevin, these are sort of constraints that you might consider them enabling constraints if you are a student of that kind of aspect of all of this work. These are ways that we will hopefully and ideally be a little more effective in the time and energy we put into dialogue and coordination of action. So how then, when we've got all these options, what do we do and what are we going to choose? Again, those 2 questions, what does it mean and what are we going to do? And so when we're examining the problems and the issues and trying to decide, is it this or is it that? Is it enough to call in the expert, or is there no expert that can deal with that? And again, getting back to our lived experience, every moment we've been alive that shapes what we think and how we think and what we want, what we need, want, prefer, and so on. The second point to me is the important one. And this is one I will say that I again came up with this back when we were at the U.S. Department of Labor. And I don't see this one much in the complexity literature. And in a way, it surprises me. This is one of the things that I have found to be extremely useful and valuable. When we're going to be in dialogue with others, trying to determine how we're going to act, can we agree on a short set, 5, 6, no more than 10, certainly, core values and operating principles? Those of us who are going to be in the room, whether it's a community group, a family group, a business group, what are the things that are most important to us? And then use those as a lens or a filter to assess all of the options and ideas that people come up with. And to me, this is a way not only of ideally productively sorting out the different options that will come up as we try to generate ideas and solutions for even the most complex and at times chaotic challenges, but it's a way that we can then hold ourselves accountable as a group who are working in this matter together. Did we do what we said we would do the way we said we would do it? Can we hold ourselves and each other accountable about these things? And these core values and principles, I tend to think about them as, well, what is important to us? What do we want? And how will we then act when we have made these decisions and taken these actions together? So again, any situation that we're in, there's going to be options from the simple flat tire to the root canal and bypass to, yes, how will we address the issues of homelessness or anything else? So I like the frequently use the image of someone surfing because of the constant in the moment response and sensing and acting and reacting that a surfer has to do in what are frequently very dynamic and changing and evolving complex conditions. So when we think about, again, these different kinds of problems, they call for different patterns, ideal patterns of action. And again, you'll see this, again, for those who are familiar with the Cynefin framework, you'll see that these come directly from this work that you've seen before. And so if we're dealing with things that are simple, or another word that's been used historically is obvious kinds of problems, we sense, oh, this is what it is. We categorize it. We compare it to the things we already know and have experienced and responded to before. Oh, it's a flat tire. Great. No problem. Now we respond. We call AAA. We do this. We get the jack out of the boot of the car, and we fix it, and we go on our way. But if it's a complicated or a technical thing, again, the root canals and the heart bypasses of our lives, we still have to start out by getting a sense of what it is. But now we have to do some analysis. It isn't something that we can immediately know in our mind, oh, it's this, and thereby do that. We have to sort of do some analysis. We've got to do our homework. We've got to, yes, consult the experts. And then finally, the complex or the adaptive challenges, somewhat different. Again, the word that we see in the Cynefin literature, we want to probe. We aren't sure exactly what's going on, and there's no way to know exactly how the parts of this whole problem are interacting. And so the only thing we can do is to try something and then see what happens, make sense of what we observe after we have acted, and then respond again to try and move ourselves towards the better outcome. But we haven't yet come to, we're getting there, that problem with problems. We'll get to that in a minute. So you can think about here, we don't have to do this in the chat waterfall, but when you begin to think about some of the things that you need and want to think about and decide about, and we may actually have someone or maybe more than one person on the call, but I can think of at least one other person besides me who knows who the artist is of this particular painting. The artist here is a fellow whose name was Don Van Vliet. He was a musician who I was privileged to have met once in London. He was better known by his stage and recording name of Captain Beefheart. And he was a great painter and artist as well as a utterly unique musician. And certainly liked to work in what you might call chaotic or complex patterning. So we think about, again, things that we need, that we want to think about and decide about. You know, again, we don't have to share them in the moment, but the kinds of challenges, again, think about the stuff that you have to confront and you have to deal with. And as I said before about emotions getting in our way, this is one of the big obstacles to acting into our most complex and at times even chaotic situations. And overwhelmingly, the stuff that really tends to confound leaders, managers, change agents, community people, any one of us in our lives, are those complex challenges. And we really get hung up about issues of fear. And it isn't only fear of failure. I've met managers who were afraid of success. Oh my goodness, they want me to make this prototype at this cost with these criteria in this period of time. And oh my goodness, if I do, they're going to expect me to get it done all the time and make it that way. Sometimes we can be afraid or intimidated by success as well as failure. And especially uncertainty. We're acting in our most complex challenges into stuff that nobody knows exactly what's going on. And yes, we are worried about what will happen, whether it's a business endeavor, in which case sometimes maybe millions or even billions of dollars will be on the line, and jobs, or public impact if it's a public policy matter. We have a public policy. I worked some years ago at another government agency where we gave $3 billion a year out for grants for substance abuse prevention and treatment and mental health services. It wasn't always easy to predict exactly what would happen. They, in fact, were suffering from what you will see as the problem with problems. Get to that in a minute. But again, the best we can do is to act in ways that are congruent with those core values and operating principles. This is what's important to us. This is the way we think we have to proceed. It's the best we can do under the circumstances, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable to those standards. Well, one of the things that begins to be the source of the big problem with problems is that there's this presumption that even in these most complex and at times even chaotic situations, that the solutions are knowable. And so we tend to fear ambiguity and failure. And the reality that we live is very different from that. The reality is, in fact, almost every leader and manager that I've ever met or talked to, they all really know, as all of us really do, that in fact, some of the solutions are simply not knowable in these kinds of situations. And there are going to be situations in which whatever is going on, it's going to be ambiguous and uncertain and unclear. And there's going to be situations in which we're going to try what we think is going to work and it will fail. And all of this gets in the way of our ability to really act in an optimal way. So this is an illustration, if you can see it clearly enough, of Lewis and Clark, and I believe it's their native, the woman that was their guide, Sacagawea. And there's an article by a fellow who way back, he's from Australia, actually met him in Manhattan once too, Sean Callahan, some of you may know the name, and he worked with Dave Snowden and Cynthia Kurtz early on when they were at IBM. And Sean now works a great deal with narrative. And he co-authored a paper that I love about Lewis and Clark. And I think it's very insightful for us as we think about the kinds of situations that we have and how we're going to act into them. You know, Lewis and Clark, these explorers of the largely unknown, to them at least, American West and Northwest. And they've got a mission from the president, go out there and see what's out there. You know, find that Northwest thing, go out that way. Well, they had a compass. They could tell which way was north or south. They had a map that had some stuff on it, that they'd gotten some information from some people over time. But as they went every day and every step of the way, they found that not everything on the map was correct. Not everything was accurate. And even the directions that they thought, well, we're supposed to go north by northwest here, maybe not. Maybe we go a little bit southwest first and then zigzag, and maybe that's the only way to get where we want to go. We begin, as we all do, with what we think we know and understand. But what is critical and key to getting to the best possible results is what we can learn and continue to understand. I like to use the acronym about going far. We need to learn to be flexible. We need to know more than one way to try and address an issue. And we, especially in complex situations and challenges, need to be adaptable, to have that adaptive capacity. We can change if and when we have to. And resilience is about how much adversity can we absorb and take and still stay committed and on the path, ideally, to what it is and where we want to go and to the result that we want to achieve. It isn't always easy, and it's certainly not always fun. So again, this character, some of you may recognize, was an old television character. He is Sam the Eagle from the old Muppet TV show, who always spoke in a very just and civil and true kind of tone. So when we, again, think about that compass, orienting ourselves not only in the physical world, but in this case, in terms of our ability to act in ways that are consistent with what we believe is important for how we should do it, our core principles and values that are going to guide us into acting into these most difficult challenges and situations. Well, again, just as with Lewis and Clark, the new information can shift our understanding, redraw the map. And so again, when we get to those kinds of heuristics, those patterns of optimal response, depending on the domain, the kind of situation we're in, the stuff you see in Dave Snowden's Cynefin literature. Well, if we're going to probe, sense, and respond, we may be probing differently, sensing differently, and responding differently if and when new information comes our way. And we need to redraw, reorient, and so on in that way. So this is another framework that I've been working on. I've actually published a journal article with my partner on this, Denise Easton, a few years ago. And we were taking a look at disruptive experience. And we began to think about, and we cheated a little bit, as you'll see on this last one in the acronym, but we've been talking about getting fluxed, the dynamics of disruptive experience, as we call it. And that when we're acting into these things that are just kind of, what is this and what happened here? And it's just so far beyond our capacity to know, to understand, and yes, to act in optimal response, or maybe at times even any response. When we're in that chaotic situation or that dazed and confused situation, and we just don't know what it is, we don't even have a clue. We are relying on these things in these domains that may help us to move forward. We need to understand and have a sense of our own feelings or emotions because they can get in the way of our ability to perceive accurately, to understand. And so we need to learn what can be learned and understand what can be understood. And then again, getting back to that optimal pattern for the most complex situations, where we cheated just a little bit phonetically here, exploring. And so these are some things that we believe are useful to think about as we are, again, acting into these most difficult kinds of situations. So again, a little bit more on this notion of flux. Our life, our lived experience, everything we've experienced up till this moment of our life leads us to our expectations, and then how we engage in the world, how we think, how we sense, how we probe, how we categorize, all of these things. And one thing to think about is the degree of difference between what we are experiencing and what we expected, and what we're able to do in our level of engagement with the situation. In this case, and this is another classic illustration, is it a square or is it a circle? Well, it's both or neither, depending on how you look at it. And how different is it depending on where one stands and how one perceives the situation. So the problem with problems, this gets to the heart of my title topic for you. What I have seen for more than 30 years of working with organizations and leaders and people in community groups and all over is, I call it the single biggest mistake. Treating the truly complex as if it was merely clear or technical or complicated, as if the expert could give you the reliable solution. And in fact, they can't. And if any of you either are consultants or have worked with consultants in business organizations about change initiatives or things of that nature, this is the classic consulting thing. The leader is afraid of admitting that they don't know what to do. They're afraid of failing. They hire a consultant. The consultant comes in and says, no problem, we fix that at, pick a company like yours and we can do this for you. But what that doesn't take into consideration are the subtle but essentially critical differences of the cultures of the different organizations, of even other subtle factors that make tremendously and significantly and ultimately make it impossible for this to work for you, because you are not that other company. Your people and your culture and your operating environment are not those other people. If any of you are fans of wine, you may be familiar with a term that's used about growing the grapes and what makes the grape of a particular place become that wine that tastes the way it does. The word is terroir. And it is all of these incredibly subtle factors of the ecosystem. What is in the soil? What bugs are there? How does the sunlight hit it? What is the rainfall? What is the temperature? And so many more factors. The chemical composition of the soil, on and on and on. The expert may know some, the farmer may know much and more. And yet, these are things that are ultimately highly complex. There's only so much that is known and so much that is knowable. And if we, in fact, treat these really complex challenges as if the expert could tell us what to do, reliably, in advance, prospectively, do this, get that, well, everything would be great, but it doesn't work. There was a famous study published in the Wall Street Journal some years ago, quite a while back, I think now, in which they reported the data that about 75% of consulting projects fail. I personally believe it is primarily and overwhelmingly for this very reason. The foundation of that single biggest mistake is what I call, little play on words here, the persistent pernicious presumption. And again, it's presuming that the causal relationship between what we're going to do and what happens when we're dealing with this complex stuff is known or knowable in advance. As if what the expert tells you, I'm the consultant, I did this over here, it's going to work the same way for you. No, it won't. This presumption. The illustration I use here is that if I squeeze the balloon hard enough, it's going to explode. Well, this one won't. It simply isn't inflated enough down at the end. Whatever you squeeze, the air is going to just flow downward. It isn't going to work. A little bit of Lego stuff here. Mind the gap for those of you who may be over in the UK. What we want to do ideally when we're dealing with this kind of stuff is to narrow that gap between what we're expecting and what we're experiencing. That will make us more at ease and more able to stay focused, to stay able to follow that path of exploration, kind of like Lewis and Clark or whoever, when we're acting into the most complex of our challenges. We can do it by inquiry, by learning, through dialogue, by, yes, exploring, trying those, again, as Dave Snowden talks about, those multiple parallel simultaneous probes that are safe to fail. So we've been talking a lot about the Cynefin framework. Well, here it is. And this is an earlier version. As you see, those of you who keep up with this literature will know that the names of the domains, and in the very, very latest iteration, I think Dave kind of merged simple and complicated. He's got kind of like 3 main domains over the last couple of weeks. I think that just came out. This is actually an earlier version, and I forget this one showing the connections, those little kind of tinker toy line things that you see in each domain, which have to do with the lines of connection and control between typically supervisors and subordinate workers. And yet you see here these different domains, and you see the ideal or optimal patterns. One thing that, and I've even seen this missed in a number of illustrations that show the Cynefin framework, is that little sort of hook thing down at the very center bottom, which is called a catastrophe cusp. It is important. And if you see a drawing of the Cynefin framework that doesn't have it, don't use that one. What does that mean? There are times, again, when we're treating things as if they are simple and clear and obvious, and maybe they are and stable. But sometimes stuff happens that will literally push us over the cliff, as it were, and throw that clear, stable situation into chaos. Again, using 9/11 as an example. I had been in the Twin Towers once in my life, was up there. It was a building, it had elevators, there was a restaurant and a bar on the 100 and whatever floor, I don't know what it was. Seemed pretty predictable until that day. And then on that day, it went from being clear and consistent and predictable into, as we know, chaos. So I'm going to share with you just a little bit more some other kinds of tools and methods that I have found to be extremely valuable in helping groups of people deal with and act into our most complex challenges. Richard Knowles originally was I think he was a chemist. He was a plant manager for DuPont. And after a chemical spill and fire at the factory that he worked at in West Virginia, he looked for new and different ways to try and lead and manage and act into complex and chaotic situations. He happened to meet Margaret, or often known as Meg Wheatley, very well-known early writer and thinker about complexity, early on in her career and her work. And he developed this framework, and some of you may know it and others may not, but I highly recommend this. Dick is, I think, the only person in the last 20 years that I actually paid to teach me their stuff. I don't say that lightly. The process Enneagram, it's simply a 9-step framework for guiding people through, again, lightly structured dialogue about the kinds of complex and other challenges that they have. And it's a wonderful way to organize and lightly structure dialogue with groups of people. And as you see the kind of green triangular points, it begins with the underlying dynamic of identity, who am I, relationships, who are we going to be, and then our will, our intention, what information will we exchange and what will we do together in this way. And you can find more information about this on the web. I will mention also, I should have put it on the slide, you'll see the link there, but I will tell you that one of Dick Knowles' colleagues, a fellow named Tim Dalmau, D-A-L-M-A-U, over in Australia, has a wonderful resource for using these Enneagrams in a variety of organizational challenge contexts. He refers to it as an enclave of Enneagrams, and it's a great resource for using that particular framework. Another set of methodologies that I have found to be incredibly valuable, and they're even fun, and I don't know the extent to which, I know Dave is familiar with these, he kind of picks on them for their attribution issues. It's called liberating structures. These were created by two friends of mine about 20 years ago through the Plexus Institute. And again, these are open source, freely accessible. There is a book, but 90+% of the information is in the website. And these are remarkable methodologies or activities for engaging every voice, every idea that is in a room or in a group to really bring forward and get beyond the well-known limitations of traditional brainstorming, the anchoring and the limiting that brainstorming creates. Liberating structures, again, can be put together in different sequences. There are 33 of these activities in the set. And depending on the nature of the challenge that you or your group or your organization or community are facing, you will find that these, again, can be extremely helpful in generating the ideas. You know, when we talk about in Cynefin, you know, multiple safe to fail probes, well, what is it we're going to try? What are these probes going to consist of with? Have to come up with the ideas. Liberating structures I have found to be one of the richest techniques and tools and methodologies to guide people in groups. And as I say, they're easy to learn. They are, in fact, explicitly based in complexity concepts. And I think that if you're not familiar with them, highly recommend that you take a quick look at these. I'm gonna, yep, got one more here. One of the things, and this is just a piece of software, a lot of times folks do mind maps and use different software tools. One of the ones that I have found, it's one of my favorite tools because of its unique dynamic way of mapping these things out. You may be familiar with what's called the brain. It is a piece of software that enables you to put in links, topics, ideas, attach files, images, websites. And every time you click on one little node in this mind map or mental map of the stuff that you're organizing, if you're working with a group, for example, it, in the moment, whatever you click on, it rearranges everything and puts your current focus central on the map. It is another tool that I have found to be quite useful in working with groups in these, helping again as an adjunct to dealing with these kinds of complex pieces of information and all the stuff we have to keep track of when we're trying to sort this stuff out. So, can't believe I actually did this more or less on time. I got right where I wanted to be. So I wanted to thank you. You heard in the intro, yes, I really do have a degree, and it really says on the diploma that it is a Master of Arts in Complexity, Chaos, and Creativity. It's from Western Sydney University. There are not too many of us out there. And again, you can find me. The email is on that website, freethink.com. If you look me up for Kane University, you can find my university email as well. I should have put it on the slide. And I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to stop sharing the slides and open this up for any comments and questions.
Well, thank you, Bruce. That was awesome. And my head is full. And I have like 14 tabs open looking for Sean Callahan's paper. And I got Cynthia Kurtz lined up. It's all fascinating. We already have a question, I believe, in the chat. Jim, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask, or shall I read it for you? Yep.
Oh, I'll go ahead and read it myself.
Hi, Jim.
And I'll correct my typo at the same time.
No problem.
So, yeah, I mean, really great stuff. And what I often encounter both in the business world and in the advocacy world is people who believe, not even believe they're in the complicated domain. They think it's a simple problem.
Yep.
Well, and very often it's, well, no, it's obvious. We just need more money. So what perspective can you offer? What sort of tools or ideas to help invite people to realize where they really are?
Great question. So that is particularly why I mention these things like the Dick Knowles process enneagram and liberating structures. Again, I've been to lots of complexity conferences and heard lots of presentations, and I don't always see and hear people mentioning specific tools and methodologies like this. You know, obviously there's things you can do with Cynefin, and if you attend any of Dave's workshops or that of other people who are also practicing in that area, there's ways to try and sort of generate, you know, what do we think the issue is and where do we put it and what are we going to do? For me, my experience over the last 20 plus years doing this is that some of these, again, lightly structured methodologies for dialogue, because in the end, it all comes down to me to those two questions. What does it mean and what am I or we going to do? Precisely as you say. Are we just going to throw money at it? Are we just going to hire the consultant? The common answers that we see that sadly aren't the right answers. It's not to say that those are never the right answers. It's the right tool for the job is what we need. And that's where the sense making and saying, all right, it's this kind of challenge or that kind of challenge. But again, if you've got leaders and people and participants who don't know, getting them all in that space of a lightly structured dialogue where we're going to talk about these things in these ways tends to balance out the differences of perception and particularly the differences of power. And those power dynamics tend to be really important, I find, in getting people out, you know, beyond that. Those are the things that get in the way. You know, I'm the boss, I know what we need, or whatever the case may be. I hope that's a helpful answer.
Yeah, it is, and I think the thought that was going through my head is, well, no, it's great if you can get people uh, get people willing to delve in deeper. And I think the key words that I got from you is the idea of a lightly structured dialogue, of just kind of, because it's going to be an incremental iterative process to get people from where they are to really where they need to be, not based on my perspective on it, but based on what the actual problem is. So
Right.
the
And by doing
starting
it
with
that
that light
way,
structure. Yeah, go.
yes. And it's not as threatening. If you just tell the boss, we're all going to sit together and we're going to talk, and you can share this, Dick Knowles thing. Oh, here's what we're going to do. There's nothing threatening about this. I don't know anybody that ever says, "Oh, I don't want to do that." And that what happens is, as the stuff emerges in the room in dialogue, and it helps to bring forward the true reality of the complexity of it and the differing points of view. And it tends again to kind of dampen or minimize the impact of the power differentials, so that these folks who might otherwise be afraid to do it or be reluctant to do it or might want to overrule it tend to find that it's a more balanced process, and they kind of go along more easily with it, I find.
Very good. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you were speaking, and I think probably just for brevity sake or clarity more than anything else, but you did touch upon it, is the role of emotion in all of this.
Yeah.
And I think it is kind of the elephant in the room, perhaps, or because it is usually framed as being a negative, something that gets in the way of something. But evolutionarily speaking, we know, of course, that emotion are oftentimes very evolutionary or fit for purpose, because if you're scared of something, it's because there's a good chance it'll get you killed.
Yeah.
And if you ignore that fear, if you ignore some of these, you could go as deep as you want into this. How do you see the role of emotion as to playing into complexity or in general, or more specifically, anywhere you want to take that? Can of worms.
Oh, that's a great question. One of the other courses that I teach, it's one that I teach every semester, is on negotiation and conflict resolution, and it's in a management context typically. And so these issues of both emotion and power are really fundamental to how we human beings treat each other and interact with each other. And so if we ignore them, that we do it at our own peril. It's in my experience. And so I think that, again, the ways that we may structure dialogue, if we're using something, whether it's the process Enneagram, there's others, you may be familiar with conversation cafes, and there's lots of other things that people do, World Cafe, that are structured dialogic methodologies. And they tend to be structured in ways, either explicitly or indirectly, that provide some balance, if you will. They provide some constraint on both emotion and power. They don't dismiss them, but rather they kind of hold them a little bit distant from the central or core issues, so that we can then talk openly, generate ideas more openly, negotiate meaning and action more openly. And I think in that way, circumvent a bit those counterproductive aspects of those factors. I don't know if that's quite what you were looking for.
Well, I think I was balancing it more, which is the standard one is emotion versus rationality, and where the latest thinking on them is they're not nearly as different as people think they are. In fact, they're so intertwined that they're kind of the same thing, but not balanced against the power, because that totally makes sense. But the idea that being overly rational and stripping away, particularly in the complex side, where you don't want to be stripping away those weak signals, but you actually want to be probing for them to see if there's some sort of merit in them, was more of the way I was thinking about it.
Yeah, and just because we feel a certain way, as you said, Jocko, doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It's whatever has led us to that feeling in that moment. That's who and what we are. It may or may not be coherent. It may or may not be rational, and it may or may not be helpful, but it's what we're feeling in the moment.
Thanks.
Oh, sure. Other comments, other questions, other cool stuff?
Thanos, you have your hand raised, so unmute yourself. And I am pronouncing your name correctly, yes?
Yes, actually, I was thinking, and right after that, Joko's question came in. It might be a way to look at this if we don't always look at or talk about complexity outside. If we look at how complex we are and how complex is the way that we operate, and feelings come into that. For example, when I find myself in a situation, I have several conflicting thoughts and several, simultaneous or not aspects of a certain problem that I'm facing. And in fact, while you were presenting, I was thinking about, can I use this not in the context of an organization, but can I think about all those questions and reflections on how I raise my kid, for example, which is a very, very personal, let's say, very internal experience. It's not out towards the outside. And maybe, okay, I will consult with some people or other parents or whatever, but there are several, options that I consider within my head and my heart or whatever. So this is probably another way to look at where feelings and emotions come into play, that it is already a complex system that is interacting with other complex systems, and we all form this interconnected, soup or whatever.
Yeah, very. And I think you make a great point about using this reflectively about ourselves. That to me is absolutely. We are, like it or not, we're complex beings. There's no two ways about that. One of the things that in retrospect, I should really put this into the slides. A lot of times people see the word dynamic, and it's a commonly used word, and it's it's in motion. Things are in motion. But when you read this literature, you see a slightly different but significantly different word, dynamical, which is to say that all of the parts are simultaneously interacting, affecting, and being affected by one another. So as you say about raising a child, well, we're not doing that in isolation. Unless you've got, it's a Skinner thing and your kid is in the box or whatever it is. We are in the world, and we are who we are, and they are who they are. And so all of these things are moving and interacting parts, evolving and changing all the time. And I think your point about using that reflectively about ourselves is a great point.
And there's another thing I was also considering about the mind the gap slide that you said that you had.
Yeah.
This difference, this gap between experience and expectation. There is another gap that I thought about at that time, the gap between trigger and reaction. That many times this is the gap that we want to broaden, to make it bigger, instead of reacting directly, just sensing what happens instead of jumping to action. And I feel that broadening this time, let's say, could narrow the gap between expectation and experience, as you suggested.
Another great point, and I didn't put it into this particular presentation, but one of the things that I've been thinking about in recent years, and again, this is a piece that I'm sort of surprised that it hasn't made it more into some of this literature and practice, and that is exactly as you say, it is the temporal or time aspect of the dynamical complex systems that we're all interacting with all the time. Not every issue and not every situation requires the same degree of urgency of response or reply. And what is the optimal time in which to take action or to assess what is going on or observe? I think we need to pay a little more attention to that in a way and explore more about temporality when we're dealing with complexity. I think your point is right on target.
Well, it's that whole notion, Bruce, that, a 5-year plan in a complex situation is pointless and ridiculous. Yeah.
Right. A 5-hour plan inside the Twin Towers wasn't going to work. I mean, and
Yeah.
you know, I don't like to keep coming back to that, but it's an example that we're pretty much all familiar with, you know. Yeah. Other questions, other comments? Barbara, I'll defer to you on the time. I'm not sure how long we've got here.
Well, it's until my eyelids start dripping.
Okay.
But I had a question about my problem with problems is that they're tricky. Like I think I have my hands around them, and then suddenly the shape changes. You know, so that it is, you know, I think what I'm asking is about how we can, like the scope of what we're defining, right? Like as opposed, because sometimes I'm working with an organization and their definition of the problem is huge and all encompassing, right? This is the problem and it's, you know, global. And, you know, I'm constantly trying to pull them back to a definition of the problem that we can manage in the allotted time and budget. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
So yeah, and again, you know, there's no question that the situation is going to be slippery, shifting. It's like that image I picked with the balloon. We think if we just squeeze it, we'll get what we want out of it, and it isn't what we thought it was. And so we take an action, and it's whether it's the Lewis and Clark example or any other that you might know or have experienced, or any one of us. Things keep shifting, and we don't like that. We want that predictability and stability and control. I sometimes put a slide in about those three words because those are part of that underlying. It's you know, centuries of Newtonian physics and all these things we do. And Richard Branson flies up to wherever he flies, and that's all because we achieve all this stuff because of learning about stuff that is frankly complicated. It's technical, it's highly complicated, but it's predictable, stable, and controllable for the most part. But the stuff, Barbara, that you're talking about, or that we tend to take up a lot of our time, it's not that. And if we treat it like that and pretend that it is, we're going to get in trouble. You talk about emotions, think about how you're going to feel if you have tricked yourself or pretended to yourself and others that you are in control and you know what it is and it's all going to be okay. And now you start to do stuff and geez, it wasn't that way and it isn't that way. And I should have known. And yeah, I really did know. And now what do I do? That's the dynamic whole aspect of it. And that to me is where these capacities to be flexible, adaptive, and resilient come into play. We have to stop pretending that it's something other than what it is, acknowledge that we're in a highly uncertain and ambiguous situation, and that's okay because that's the way the world really is. And we're not going to just die, I don't think, for the most part. If we don't mind the gap, we might, but it's okay. And what will we do in the moment if things don't go the way we intended or predicted or were told they would? We have to be more flexible. We have to be more adaptive. And those to me are fundamental skills that we all need to really work on to do better reacting into this kind of stuff.
I just wanted to note with your Richard Branson quote, you've just time-stamped this presentation forever.
Thank you. That's my intention and my purpose.
All right.
Well, the other thing I'll say, and this goes back to the emotion thing, is that I've spent a lot of my career in situations where like all emotion was dismissed and used as a way to dismiss ideas. You know, so emotional. And you can't listen to what they say. They're so emotional. And I think that it's a balancing act because you don't want emotion to override things, but also, you know, emotion is sort of like one of the well springs of intuition and, you know, innovation in many ways. It's the feelings that give you ideas. And I think that, you know, it's always a circle, right? And I started at one point of the circle where we were all supposed to be robots and have no emotions. And then we moved through this period when it was all emotion all the time. And now like we're back to maybe we have to eliminate emotion. And and I just go, okay, fine. But there is a lot to be said for tapping into the emotional resonance in a group, in a team, in a meeting as a sort of wellspring for ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And that to me is one of the places where the liberating structure stuff the way that these are structured, if you take a look at the, what they call the microstructures, every one of these has sort of simple design principles and concepts for those who are not familiar with them. And they are put together in certain ways that, again, address the emotional presence in the room. They address the differing perspectives in the room. And they leverage these, in my mind, in very positive ways by making them engaging and even entertaining and even fun as people are talking together about some really difficult stuff.
Okay, any other questions? Come on, I know you want to ask them.
I had put one into the chat, Barbara. This is Bernie.
Hi, Bernie. Go ahead.
You had touched lightly upon adaptive capacity. Are there any particular approaches that you can briefly share for enhancing adaptive capacity, both for individuals and also for organizations?
Great question. One of the things that, and I was pre-COVID, I was all set to take a class in this in Philadelphia. But one of the things that I have a friend who teaches this, and I've been to some seminars, and that's improv. Improv techniques, as they are applied in business and in life, can be extremely helpful for this kind of adaptive response capacity that we talk about. And that's something that you will see. There are people out there, and lots of them, who, the theater game, I see the book being held up by Jim. Yeah, I don't know that particular one. But there's all kinds of great stuff about improv, the Yes and folks, and Second City folks and others. There's all kinds of stuff you can do using improv techniques that, again, engage people in ways that they're not threatening. They level off the emotions and the power, and they help you to be much more adaptive in the moment. And I find that that's been a really productive and fun way to do it. And I tend to like stuff that's both productive and fun, if you haven't noticed.
Mm-hmm. And a brief comment on Barbara's previous question. My observation is that management wants a paved road, but the company that they are managing is actually in the woods in the rain.
Yeah, there's all that. It's that as if kind of stuff, and we see that it's typically rooted in fear. Either the fear of failure, the fear of admitting that they don't know, or I don't know, or we don't know. And that happens a lot. And even to the point, as you say, of ignoring the obvious and utterly, we talk about multiple coherent narratives. Lots of times the narratives that such fearful people put forward, they're not coherent, they're not justifiable in any way, shape, or form. And yet they act as if that's the reality when everybody around them included, knows that it's not. Yeah.
Yes, those narratives are homogenized and pasteurized.
Oh, there you go.
Again, thank you very much for this.
They don't taste very good.
Yes, and thank you very much for this presentation.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you for being here. And I have to say, before we wrap this up and stop the recording, I absolutely must give a shout out to Walter Horn. I will tell all of you, Walter Horn was a friend of mine growing up in Syracuse, New York, who I met when I was, I think, 7 years old in second grade. I have not seen Walter Horn in real, we're social media pals, but I haven't seen Walter in live and in real time in, I don't know, decades, I think. I couldn't tell you exactly when. So I am just thrilled and delighted beyond measure that you're here with us tonight. And I will tell you, Walter is a PhD and an expert globally known in the philosophical world. So he should have been answering a lot of these questions that I couldn't.
Not at all. It's nice to see you too. I enjoyed the beef heart and the R crumb. Bruce hasn't changed that much.
No, not at all.
I think you'll find a lot of Beefheart fans in this group, probably.
Oh, well, that's a possibility. I don't know.
Bruce and I are personal friends with somebody who was in the Magic Band.
Yep.
Who also grew up in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Oh, you have to tell us who that is. Of course.
His name is Gary Lucas, and he's one of the 10 greatest guitar players in the world.
Oh.
And for those who are in New York, He's going to be doing a show. It's a 40th anniversary retrospective of his band called Gods and Monsters. I'll give Gary a little plug. What the hell?
Yeah, I'll take it.
And check it out if you're interested in some amazingly cool music. So there you go. Well, thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Jocko. This has just been just great to be able to share it with everybody. I hope all have enjoyed it.
Bruce,
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bruce.
Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on and giving us your time. Before we close this out, does anyone have anything else they want to ask or say? I'm looking at you like bow, and I mean, the people I know usually have questions. Come on. All right. Well, on that note, Jocko, any final thoughts, Jocko?
There's a motorcycle outside my window, so I just want to thanks again for showing up, for everybody for coming, and welcome to New York.
and thank you, everyone. Take care. All the best to everybody.
Thank you, Bruce, and we'll be back next month. The next presentation will be announced sometime in the next couple of weeks for the middle of August, and stay cool if you're in the New York City area or anywhere else that it's super hot, and we really appreciate you.
And we have our Vimeo page up for everybody that's
make sure to watch for the videos.
It's Vimeo, and it's /Complexity Lounge, I believe, and you'll be able to find it.
Complexity Lounge, and share them with the people you love the most, because that's what we do with Complexity. All right. So thanks, everybody. And again, thank you, Bruce. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I wouldn't be here without you.
Talk to you soon, Bruce. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Loved it.